There you go, we're live. Very happy to be joined by Martin Stewart today. Do you want to start us off with a short intro to you and your books?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Martin Stewart. I'm a Scottish writer based on the west coast of Scotland. I stay in Troon. I'm originally from Glasgow. And to this point, what I've done mostly, and I've been doing this for nearly 10 years, come Christmas this year, it will be 10 years that I've been doing this full time, is kids' books and young adult books. And I've done a whole bunch of different things. I've written fantasy. So my first book was a sort of soggy Dickensian fantasy. I then wrote a young adult comedy horror, which was set in the 80s, which I wrote before Stranger Things had come out on Netflix, which is quite important. It was set in 1986. It's very much a kind of funnier Scottish Stranger Things. And I've now branched out again. I'm writing a middle grade series, which is for about 8 to 12-year-olds, which is a mystery. It's real sort of cake-based mystery fun for younger kids. And the fourth one of those is out in September. It's out on the 5th of September. And what I'm here talking tonight about is another sort of expansion in terms of age and genre, which is into adult crime fiction for grown-ups. I always feel because I'm a children's writer, I need to say it's an adult book. And then, there's a sort of raising of eyebrows, and I have to clarify that it's not a 50 Shades style adult book. It's a book for grown-ups. And that is Double Proof, which has made it onto the shortlist for the debut prize at Bloody Scotland, which is great, and it's been a really exciting development. I've really enjoyed doing that so much. So that's what I've been doing until now. There'll be more kids' books on the way after this, and I'm hoping more Gould, who is the central character in Double Proof as well.
What are some of the titles of your kids' books?
So the kids' books, yeah, the mystery series. So the first book that I had out was 2016. It came out. It was Riverkeep. The Stranger Thingsy style book was The Sacrifice Box. I then had a kind of upper middle grade book, maybe sort of 10 to 13-year-olds, that came out in the States and Canada, called The Wild Hunts Boys. I say it was America, Canada, and the Philippines, which I assume is a kind of historical military connection of some kind. That was the US territory. And the kids' books, the younger kids' book series, the sort of mystery super sleuth magical bakery, is Bridget Vanderpuff. So that's Bridget Vanderpuff, and there's 4 of those. The first one is Bridget Vanderpuff and the Baked Escape. And it goes on through Bridget Vanderpuff and the Ghost Train, Bridget Vanderpuff and the Great Airship Robbery. And the 4th one, which is out in September, is Bridget Vanderpuff and the Monster Mountain Mystery. And that's her up in the Swiss Alps. And it's been really good fun. And actually, I had written the first Bridget book at the same time as I wrote Double Proof, which was during lockdown. And it was they were both, between them, they were the first things that I had done on spec without a contract at all. And it felt like, it was during COVID, as I say, it was during lockdown. I had gone a couple of years without having a new contract for a book, and it felt a little bit like a sort of creative existential moment. It felt slightly like not quite a last roll of the dice, because I would always have kept writing. It was my hobby before it was my job, and I would never stop writing. But in terms of doing things at the pace that I have been, and having books coming out reasonably regularly, this felt like a real go at that, a sort of last attempt to make that happen during what had been a bit of a hiatus, partly because of lockdown. And so I wrote the first Bridget Vanderpuff book and Double Proof side by side. So, and I would finish, when I was trying to polish the drafts, I would finish a draft of one and go back to the other, and vice versa. Which, very different vibes, obviously, writing for 8-year-olds and writing a sort of violent, sweary Glasgow crime novel. But I think there's quite a crossover in terms of the characters and in terms of the way that they approach things. It's a question of vocabulary and pace and things like that. So there's no swearing in the Bridget books. there's a bit of swearing in Double Proof, you know. But there was never a sort of issue of struggling to change voice or anything. It was a fun thing, and I'd really enjoy being able to do both, you know.
So with all the sort of background of middle grade and sort of young adult, what made you do that jump into the adult fiction?
Do you know, it's funny. I'd previously said to somebody else that this Double Proof was the book that I always wanted to write, and that isn't. My wife picked me up on it, and you know she was right to, because that's not what I meant to say. That isn't exactly it. It's more that it was the book I always expected to write, because when I started taking the process of writing and trying to get something published seriously, I was about 19, and I was really heavily reading Chris Brookmyre. Particularly A Big Boy Did It and Ran Away. I remember when I was about 19, 20, maybe I read that, I think maybe 4 or 5 times in a year. And that was the template for what I really wanted to do. And the way that he did things, and the locale, and the way that he used quite ordinary quotidian spaces that I really recognised in the south side of Glasgow, or tenement closes in the west end of Glasgow and things. It was just, these were places that I really recognised and understood. And I was really inspired by the use of them to do something really funny, and that had quite a sort of, quite a sort of Hollywood scope in some ways, a lot of his books. And so that was really, I was a terrible mimic at that point. It's something that I still sort of worry about, that I can be quite prone to. I don't read a lot of fiction when I'm trying to write. I read a lot of non-fiction instead. And it's because I feel like I'll want to borrow someone else's voice, or see what someone else has done and think, oh, this is what I should have been doing, you know. And especially something really interesting, or with a different take on it, like Stuart Turton or something like that. I think, oh no, I'm doing it wrong. I need to be doing more like this, and I want to sort of steer a bit clear of that. But so those books, the Brookmyre books particularly, and I read all of Rebus as well. My mother had bought me, just without us discussing it or anything. She'd suddenly come home one day with, I don't know if you remember the big Ian Rankin books, that were the big jumbo paperbacks, and they had 3 books in them. It was some release of the first half dozen Rebus books, and there were these huge big tomes, each of which had 3 novels in them. And I read these just like single books. I just absolutely hoovered them up, and I wasn't particularly thinking about them being crime fiction, and I just found the shape of them really satisfying. I found the denouement and the tying together of all these disparate threads really satisfying. I really liked Rebus. I thought he was such a solid, credible character, and I loved that you knew how he would react. That when he was put in certain situations by the farmer, or when he came up against Ger Cafferty or whatever it was, you knew what he was going to say and how he was going to do things, and it made him feel really real. Which was very much like the other things that I was reading when I was younger, were the Discworld books, the Terry Pratchett books, and I really tried to mimic him for years badly. I really can't mimic Terry Pratchett. But his characters are like that. Sam Vimes, which again, thinking of the sort of crime procedural structures, I really love the Watch books. And Granny Weatherwax, who's another one of his characters, who is so well defined that you know exactly how Granny will react, and that just adds so much to his toolkit. And I love characters like that. And that's something I really wanted to do. I'm pointing here because I've got the book here. Gould, in the book, I really wanted to be that sort of character who, when he finds himself in certain scenarios, it's it's like when you turn the key in his back and off he goes. And as a reader, hopefully, there's one book, I'm hoping for more, but even within the confines of this first book in which we meet him, we understand him clearly enough that he's well enough defined that we know how he'll react in these scenarios. And that builds anticipation in terms of the humor or the sort of outbursts of casual violence and things that we get, because we know what he's like really quickly, So I really had always expected to write a book like this. I always really hoped to. The stuff when I had been writing for children that in itself had been unexpected, because I was a teacher. I was a teacher for 7 years. I taught English up here. And I had been, I think, like a lot of people, I'd been really surprised to find myself a teacher. You know, I hadn't left school thinking, I'd love to come back here. You know, I was in my mid-20s. I hadn't found what I wanted to do. I did my year's teacher training, my postgrad teacher training, and was really surprised to love it, to really, really love it, and to love the company of my classes and the kids. And I just enjoyed being with them and the interactions I had with them so much. And so I wrote for them, and that was where the children's fiction came from. And in a way, that was kind of the unexpected interruption, because this was more what I had been building towards. And so it was really just lockdown and the kind of enforced hiatus of that gave me the time, and sort of forced on me the opportunity to sit down and write a full manuscript and write the whole book, and to try and take it out to the market and get it published, which happened, which was just great. I mean, it's been really, because it's breaking out of something, you know, being a children's writer and having somebody take my work seriously enough to publish it is really, it feels like a real vindication of something that I believed for a long time I could do. And so it's been really, really thrilling to be able to do that.
We've got a hello from Patsy, who's one of our Scottish admin. I don't know if you've met her yet, but she will meet you at the debut prize, she says.
Oh, great. All right. Looking forward to that.
She was worried. She's like, you're not late, Patsy. We hadn't been going long when you joined. She's a massive champion of Scottish authors in our group.
Brilliant.
So she will.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Just a few weeks to go.
Yeah, I was smiling at you because I love Terry Pratchett.
Oh, good. Yeah, John, I saw you reacting to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I was having a conversation
did you
with
really
her.
like was it the watch books in particular for you because of that crime procedural element?
Well, no, I mean, I've got a lot of love for the watch books, but possibly the witches.
Yeah. I think that's his best stuff. I really love the watch books for their structure, but I think the witches books are. I think Granny and Nanny are the best characters and the best foil for each other, you know. But yeah, Granny Weatherwax, I think, when I think of a well-defined character, I think of her. I mean, she's a sort of paradigm that I'm always reaching for, because I think, like in those books, when somebody could say something to Nanny, and as a reader, even before you've read her response, you sometimes kind of wince, because you think, oh God, you can't say that to Granny Weatherwax, you know. And having that exist there means that the reader, you trust them, you know exactly, you know you're in good hands, you know that everything is, that the story is working, that it's not going to cheat and all that kind of stuff. And it's, I love them. I'm a major Weatherwax fan. And I mean, it was when I finished my degree, my English degree, the witches books, and I think sort of half a dozen Discworld books were the first things that I went back to and read just for pleasure. It was, you know, it's such an indulgence to reread those. But as I say, in a crime context, I was a big fan of the Sam Vimes books, the watch books. I thought they were great. And that the mysteries are always really well put together.
Yeah, there's a lot of crime authors who are fans of Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, I bet.
Did you also catch me laughing at the "no one sets out to be a teacher" thing? Because I'm a teacher.
Oh, really? Yeah, I loved it. I mean, as I say, I really was it was unexpected. But I did love it. I mean, it was something that, I don't know, it caught me by surprise, because I don't have any younger cousins at all. My brother and I don't have any cousins. And I wasn't used to the company of younger people. And I think lots of my friends are teachers, but the ones who weren't, I think they imagine it to be a more adversarial and sort of combative environment, and you imagine you must be sort of constantly filled with fury. And I never felt like that. I worked with some people who did seem to feel like that, I would say, who didn't seem to enjoy the company of their classes as much as I did, which must make it quite a long day. But I really did. I really loved it, and I found it. I mean, it really inspired me. I wanted to write for them, and it was the thing that ultimately gave me my first starting publishing was writing for younger kids. It is less, it's a less natural voice for me, I think. I mean, I've found that I really love the voice that I've got for the Bridget books, and it now comes very easily. But the first Bridget book took me 5 years to write. The one that was published in the States and Canada, I wrote and published between starting the first Bridget book and it eventually being finished, because I couldn't find the voice and the sort of the energy of that, and the positivity, and all the sort of kids TV presenter, like that sort of constant edge of excitement, was just something that it didn't come totally naturally to me. Whereas the main character and the voice in Double Proof is that of a sarcastic Glaswegian prick, if I'm allowed to use that word. And that, make of it what you will. That was a really natural fit for me, and it really flowed really easily. And it was fun being in that space, and a bit of swearing, because I'd not been able to swear in any of my books, and that was something that felt like a sort of slight cutting loose, because I am a bit of a swearer in real life. And writing about Glasgow as well was something that I'd always been a bit intimidated by. I'd never done anything in a real life setting before. Everything had been either a kind of slight amalgam, or kind of hodgepodge, or a version of something else, or just a straight out fantasy setting. So this was the first time I'd set something in a real place, and I was a bit intimidated by it, but it was great and fueled elements of the story. It's the constraints and the parameters in something end up driving it in some ways. I really enjoyed it. In terms of how long it would take him to drive somewhere, meant that I could only do certain things within the plot, and all that kind of stuff. I loved it. I really had a great time doing it.
Well, let's talk a bit more about Robbie, because Double Proof is fantastic, by the way.
Well, thanks very much.
Absolutely love it. I do not know how anyone decides who wins these prizes, especially the Bloody Scotland, because they're always so good. Like,
yeah, I've never been on a judging panel, so, and I don't envy them. I've only read one of the other shortlistees, which was Susie's book Crow Moon, which I really enjoyed. I read that on holiday, and yesterday I took delivery of Doug Sinclair's book, which I'm really looking forward to. So I am going to read the rest of them. But I started Doug's, and I've really enjoyed them so far. So yeah, I don't envy them their choice. I'm delighted to be shortlisted, obviously, because it gives me the chance to do stuff like this, which is great. I mean, that's the prize, obviously, is being able to enjoy it, being able to be on the panel up there and all that kind of stuff. But I'm glad you liked it. I'm really glad you liked it. I'm proud of it. I really, when I go back to read bits and things, I enjoy it as well. It's a fun world for me to be in.
oh, Patsy says she's read all of the debut ones. You're her last one.
Oh, right. Okay. Great. Okay.
Interesting. I'm working my way through, but I've read them for a few years, and they always end up, between this and the McIlvenney, at least one of them will be on my 10 books of the year at the end of the year.
Right.
I found, if not like my favorite read of the year.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Great. That's amazing.
So like last year's Winners and Maiden was my favorite book of the year.
Oh yeah. I remember that one. That was Scottish Book of the Month then up here as well in Waterson's. I've not read that one. I've heard really good things though.
And Pine, I think, won the McIlvenney Prize.
Yes.
Pine was my favorite book of the year I read Pine. So
yeah, it was a good sort of creepy Highland Gothic. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, so you're in good. Really big fan of Alistair Liddell as well, who was on the debut prize with his like books set in Georgia. They're great.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's a very, that's been something that's been really nice about all of this, is the community that you're plugging into. It's a very vibrant area of publishing, and because Scottish crime is such a kind of strong niche, and it's here, sometimes publishing can seem very London centric, which I know I saw there was a kind of northern publishing movement. There's going to be a new centre in Newcastle, which is great, and a slight decentralisation of that kind of thing. But in terms of Scottish crime and that sort of tartan noir branding, it's here on my doorstep, which is great. So that's been something that's really nice. It is an extremely welcoming community as well. People are really nice, and there is always a sense, because I've not been on the programme before at Bloody Scotland, but I've played in the Scotland-England football match at Bloody Scotland 3 times. So I've been the goalie for the last couple of years, and I played in 2017 as well. And so in terms of being up there and being around it and being involved, there is always a sense that people give you a sense that there's room for everyone at the table, which is so nice, because actually there really isn't. It's quite a competitive market, but everybody's very generous with their time and things. It's been brilliant. It's really it's a really nice thing to be involved in. Anyway, sorry, I'm rabbiting on there. You were asking me about Robbie.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about Robbie because he's such a good character, isn't he? So he starts off billed as like a psychic detective.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that was one of the kind of seeds of it, that I just imagined him with this kind of stain, this sort of reluctant reputation. His reluctance was really important, because the bit at the very start, the very first chapter, in terms of setting him up, was something that I had right from the beginning. Do you want me to read a wee bit? I could read a wee bit of the first chapter if that's
fine. We don't normally do it readings.
That's fine. Yeah, no problem. That first chapter where he takes out, there would be this woman in distress outside his house, and he would take out 2 cups of tea and then drink them both in front of her, was something that I had right from the beginning. And that instant establishment of him as this sort of chisely prick, basically. But of course he's not really. And the breaking down of that slightly more obnoxious or outwardly obnoxious element of his character, and his misanthropy, and the kind of cheerful belligerence that he has, as that breaks down over the course of the novel, of course we understand who he really is, and his reluctance, that you're getting dragged into this purely for money, in a slightly mercenary sense, where he has to go and look for this boy. And of course he has to want to find him. Ultimately, he can't just be doing it for the money, and he gets emotionally committed to it, and we have to want him to want to do it. And so there was a little bit of a creative challenge for me in terms of setting him up as somebody who was apparently, a sort of, as I say, a kind of obnoxious, belligerent lump, really, and making us warm to him, and making us, hopefully by the end, really love him and feel like he's our guy, was something that was really fun. And the voice and the things that he says, his voice and his dialogue and things were really central to that. So I'm sorry, I'm just seeing Patsy's comment here about the Alsatian. Yeah, I remember the Alsatian. The dog in the pitch is always such a classic feature of major football incidents. That's being involved in the football at Bloody Scotland has been really good, and so being able to go up in this context has been great. I'm not sure if there is football this year, is the only thing. So we'll see.
There probably will be.
I think they've had 10 games. They've had 10 years of it, and I think they might be phasing it out. I'm not sure. We'll see. My boots and gloves remain at the ready if called upon. It's a fun thing. I think part of it was that the year before last, Luca Vesti injured his hand in goals for England, and was supposed to be playing in the fun-loving crime writers gig that night.
Oh dear.
I think that caused they got a bit of a fright, and that caused a wee bit of a problem. So none of the fun-loving crime writers played in last year's game. So like Chris Brookmeyer and Doug Johnson and Luca, Mark Billingham, these guys who normally played didn't, so that they were still fit for the gig that evening. Because obviously they're now playing Glastonbury and things, so it's getting serious for them, so they can't afford to get injured. So I think that might be part of it. But yeah, sorry, we were talking about Robbie. So it's his journey, the shape of his story, in terms of getting, as I say, emotionally involved and becoming emotionally engaged in looking for Albie, and being able to do, and I've talked about this quite a lot, that kind of the strongly defined nature of a character when he goes in up against that sort of belligerence of being able to, walk straight up to the biggest gangster in Glasgow and noise him up and, give him the smart mouth and things, was such a release, and it was such a fun thing to do, because these are obviously things that I would never do, and there's an element of I think, talking about another sort of, major archetypal character is Alan Partridge. And when I was at school, Alan Partridge was a big character on TV. Partridge is a big thing. And I've seen Steve Coogan talking about him, and because he plays the character, he gets a lot of, how much of you is Alan and vice versa, And what he was saying was, that Alan is him with no filter, basically, and all the things that might occur to him to say that are not remotely socially acceptable or polite or anything like that, Alan can say, and that sort of filterlessness, and it's a bit like that with Gould. The things that I would never say because I'm not willing to be punched in the face, he doesn't care, and the absolute kind of death wish recklessness with which he throws himself into things was a brilliant creative thing to have, because it meant that whatever the most challenging, cheeky thing he could say was, he said it, and it was a great driver of story because it gets him into all kinds of scrapes and it gets him back out of scrapes. And it's fun because, as I say, I was writing this in lockdown. We were stuck in the house. When lockdown started, my kids were 3 and 5 months, and there was quite a lot of work to do in the house with them, and it became very difficult to try and get work done. And so the release of my work, it always had to be fun. And the thing that I wanted from Double Proof, based on my own reading as well, and what I wanted to achieve with it, was that it would be fast, funny, and stick the landing. And that's, again, going back to the Brookmeyer stuff that I really loved, that was a real template that I was working towards. And I wanted it to be really quick. That's why it's a missing persons case rather than a murder, because I didn't want to do the kind of procedural things playing out over multiple, weeks or whatever. That sort of, the kind of ticking clock that's hanging over Albie, who has a deadline and a ransom, meant that I gave myself a ticking clock, and I had to keep moving, and I had to write quickly, and it had to be fast, because I want that to be the reading experience. And I really wanted it to be funny. I'm saying that I put lots of jokes in it. I hope it's funny.
It's definitely funny.
It makes me laugh. I enjoyed it, and it was. I can't not put jokes in things. Everything that I've done has been funny. It's sci-fi fantasy with funny, or horror but also funny. And I just think that's an accurate and honest reflection of life. Life is funny. Funny things happen all the time, and I'm going back to Terry Pratchett again. It's a big thing of mine. And I received a review, which was a good review, but mentioned within it something about the sort of comparative seriousness of Double Proof relative to other crime novels, and listed a couple of those. And I take issue with the conflation of seriousness with a lack of humor, because now it might not be Terry Pratchett's original line. I associate it with him. He might be paraphrasing somebody else, but this was something that used to bug him, because I think his books, he felt, were sometimes treated a bit lightly, or maybe not given the sort of the kind of weight that they deserved for a 40-book series that had constructed this entire world, but was maybe sort of a bit dismissed sometimes because they were funny. And his thing was that the opposite of funny is not serious. The opposite of funny is not funny. And you can be serious and funny at the same time. And I think that's often how you draw the poison out of the wound, and how you open people up for more of an emotional gut punch, or you catch them unawares with a burst of violence or whatever that's going to be. That I think the humor is totally central to it for me. I couldn't imagine Robbie without it. I don't think I would struggle to write about Glasgow without having people with a smart mouth in it, which is very much how people in Glasgow think of themselves, you know. And that's something that's obviously quite common to other, you know, major kind of post-industrial cities. I mean, you think of like Liverpool automatically, which, you know, it's a similar sort of energy, you know. But that's so the humor in it was something that was really, really important to me. And the stick in the landing thing, because it has to feel satisfying. And what I was wanting to do with this when I was writing, and part of my pitch in terms of approaching my agent with it to see about getting it published, and the way that I explained it to myself when I was writing this to help me kind of stay on message, was a kind of more cynical, violent Glaswegian Big Lebowski. And that's why Robbie comes out in the first chapter with his dressing gown on, just with a little shout to the dude in the Big Lebowski. And I wanted that same energy of kind of chaos, and that there would be this apparent sort of maelstrom of things happening that would seem unconnected, and eventually at the end, of course, he ties them up. That's what I was saying about my early experience of reading the Rebus books when I was younger, was how satisfying it was when this apparent melee of stuff is then brought together, which is the thing that I think makes crime and mystery the ultimate genre. It's the ultimate story, because you get that the conjuring of order from chaos is just so elementally satisfying. I really want to do that with my story, and it has to feel authentic and satisfying and credible, and you can't cheat, you know. So you can't, as I felt, what was the Harlan Coben Netflix series with Michelle Keegan that was so popular? Oh, Now You See Me? No, I can't remember. The Harlan Coben Netflix series with Michelle Keegan, the recent one. I felt there were a couple of bits where, when you're shown her flashbacks of various things, where you see looks on a character's face that is only for the viewer, it's not as a pretense to another character or whatever, were misleading in a couple of wee ways. I just thought, oh no, I just felt they were pushing you in a misleading direction, and you can't do that. You can't cheat. It has to be there on the page, and it has to stand up to a rereading, which is a central thing. I'm a big rereader. I love rereading books. So I hope then that it stands up to a rereading in terms of the credibility, and also that it would reward a rereading in terms of, unearthing a couple of nice wee touches maybe that you missed on the first time through.
Have you read Carl Hyacin? I don't know how to
Yeah.
pronounce it. But get that vibe with your book. He's quite like, because there's a lot of comedy, isn't there? But there's also quite a lot of violence in his books, and that's very true.
I am delighted about that.
Very violent in places.
Yeah. My approach letter about this, at the bottom, I described what I was trying to do as Carl Hyacin meets Chris Brookmeyer. So I was referencing Carl Hyacin as a conscious thing on which I was drawing. And one of the reasons that it's called Double Proof is because of Carl Hyacin's book Double Whammy, which is, I think, maybe the first one with Skink with the teeth, and it's the fishing competition. It's the bath
characters of all time.
I think he's really excellent. And I'm so pleased that you've said that, and that you really picked up on that, because that was really definitely something. Double Whammy is particular. I've read quite a few of them, so like Skin Tight and various other ones. But Double Whammy, I really loved. I thought it conjures. He's writing about Florida and the kind of skeezy Everglades, Florida, and I just thought he brought it to life brilliantly. I thought his characters were great. There's a sense of fun about it. It's a serious book. There's some serious violence in it. He's got a real commitment to a kind of environmental principle, and an environmentalist idea that runs as a really quiet subtext in what he's doing that I really love. His kids' books are the same. Hoot, and I can't remember the one with the turtle. Flush, I think it might be called. Where he obviously really cares about that, and that sort of informs what he's doing. But they are fun, and there's a kind of heightened silliness to it. And actually, I'm seeing Patsy's comment come in with a good PI story, feel a wee bit slapstick. I'm delighted with that, because that's what I was about to say with the Hyacinth thing. I'm sure it's double proof, where the bad guy is bitten on the hand by like a bull terrier, and he can't get it off his hand, so he kills the dog, but still can't remove the dog's head. So he has to sever the dog's head and spends the rest of the book going around with this mouldering dog's severed head clamped to his hand, and ends up sort of stroking it and treating it like a pet. And I mean, this surreal and quite barbaric and gruesome, and a little bit unpleasant, but also a bit slapstick and a bit silly. And the slapstick elements in Gould, which I think is I'm going to lean into that expression, because I think that's okay. There is a bit where Gould fights. He finds himself fighting a Japanese gangster, like a Yakuza enforcer, very suddenly in a tenement in Glasgow, and totally caught unawares. He slaps at his face, and the line that I've got is that he slaps at his face as though putting out a sudden napkin fire. And I'm really pleased with that, and I really like it, because to me it conjures the ridiculousness of the situation in which two grown adults are fighting. I think you can be too postured with that stuff, and I think that sort of people throwing stylized punches. I would lean in that context much more towards the kind of Bridget Jones fight with Hugh Grant and Colin Firth just kind of slapping at each other's faces a bit. And although he's a former very serious amateur boxer, as we see elsewhere, he can really throw a punch. But at the same time, there is just a sort of a slight ridiculousness to this, and this sort of chaos of it all. And there's another bit where, when he's talking to the big scary gangster, Angus Chisholm, who's the biggest gangster in Glasgow, and somebody grabs him, and as Gould kind of shoots off screen, the coffee cup he's holding just spins in the air, and Chisholm catches it, which is, I mean, that's straight out of Looney Tunes. There's no way that would happen. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to be fun with this kind of stuff. That as he goes, the bad guy catches his coffee cup and says, oh, off you go, And there's, I'm definitely leaning into it being a sort of heightened version. I think it's credible. I think it's believable that things would happen this way. I've really tried hard to make that the case. There's an autopsy scene, which I researched extensively. It took me absolutely ages. These are, as far as I can tell, in terms of, consulting a lot of different sources. That's exactly how these injuries would be viewed, treated, how they would happen, all that kind of stuff. So that the bones of it are all really credible. But I think, I'm not sure if you've ever read Tina Fey's autobiography, Bossy Pants. It's really good. I really like 30 Rock. It's really funny. My wife and I have listened to that on audiobook, I mean, countless times. I'm not sure how many times. But she talks about her work and says about the writing process. Obviously, she's doing overt comedy. She's writing for Saturday Night Live, and she's got her own sitcoms and things. But what she was saying was, have some fun with it. Like, throw in some dancers. Why not? And I kind of subscribe to that a little bit, that it's okay to have some overt fun with it and to be a little bit silly. And again, that's the same way that when you do that kind of thing, but you also have real pathos and credible emotional relationships, and the way that the character speaks makes them sound like real people, so you care about them, and you want them to survive and things. I think you can have, I certainly hope to try and achieve both of those things. And so the sort of heightened, slightly baroque violence is definitely part of that. Because if you filmed this exactly as it appears on the page, the amount of physical punishment Robbie endures is totally over the top. I mean, nobody. There's an element of John Wayne's 6-shooter with unending bullets. And that's part of that sort of heightened thing. The good cowboys never get shot, and they can shoot everybody really easily. All that kind of stuff. This is part of that. It's the same sort of energy that you would get in something like Lethal Weapon or something like that, where it's just a little bit over the top, but we believe in the characters and we want to go with them. And that's definitely what I was trying to do with this.
It does work. I was reading parts of it out to my husband as I was reading it, going like, I don't know where this is going to go.
Oh, I'm really pleased about that. I'm pleased about both of those things that you would feel, because
he actually worked part of it out. There's like a scene early on where something happens, and I was like, I don't know where this is going to go. And he went away and like had a bath and came down. He was like, no, I think I know. He was like, I think it's going to do this.
Right.
And he was right, actually.
Oh, do you know what? I'm so pleased about that, because I'll read bits aloud to my wife, but not often. I mean, it's like it has to. I don't read anything to her, so I'm really pleased about that. Thanks very much. And it's an interesting one when you're saying, in terms of being able to figure it out. I had asked Craig Robertson, or C.S. Robertson, for a bit of advice before I was starting writing this, and I know Craig only a little bit through playing the football. He plays in the Scottish writers team. We had been to Italy together to play against the Italian writers. It's not important who won that game; it doesn't matter. Craig and I had chatted at the time. Years ago. This is 2016 we did that, so it's a long time ago. But I had emailed him to say, I'm just about to start writing this. Do you have any advice? And he gave me a couple of bits of advice. His first bit of advice was, don't kill dogs. Cats okay in moderation. It's good advice. And his next bit was, the why done it is often as or sometimes more interesting than the who done it. And I thought, yes, I really grabbed that, because I thought that's what I want to do. That's more what I was wanting to write. I hope that people will be caught out, and it's not that it's predictable by any means. I think it's potentially, there are elements of it that are workable, outable, and guessable, because that's part of the fun of reading this kind of book, that you want to try and preempt it, and you're reading the clues as you're going. As I say, you can't cheat; it has to all be there. But the why done it and the how done it, I think, are more central to the kind of denouement that it has, and what I was trying to achieve with it. Because even I think I hope if you're able to work out some parts of it, that doesn't mean that you're able to say how it would all fit together, or why that's,
Yeah,
that balance is part of it,
We didn't figure out the whole thing. We just figured out a tiny thing. But it was good to it was quite fun. The other thing I really liked in it was the number of times that, like, people, especially his ex-wife, finds out later, doesn't she? And they go and talk to people who've met Robbie, and they have a particular look on their face, and they're like, "Oh, you've definitely met him. He's been here."
Yeah, that's it. Exactly, that's it. And I think that's after he's been in See the Big Gangster, and she sees there's a guy whose eyes twitching, and she says, "Oh, there's somebody who spent time in Robbie's company." And again, that's part of the fun of that he's this, I don't know, I say loose cannon, which is a real cliche. Again, I'm mentioning Lethal Weapon, because my wife and I recently watched the first Lethal Weapon film. So that sort of, archetypal loose cannon is something that I'm sort of having fun with. I think there's a bit more to him than that. but it's I think I've used this already, but I really think of it in those terms that you can. I feel like I can really easily turn a key in his back, and off he goes. And part of it he understands as a. I'm sorry, my dog is scratching the carpet there. I'm sorry if that was an annoying sound. He understands it as a legitimate way of getting what he wants. And it's in terms like Bertie, he's the brother-in-law of Imelda DL. He's Albie's uncle who's gone missing. His interactions with him, he really seeks out to deliberately antagonize him, and he thinks of it because he's inexperienced. He's a former national champion boxer. There are some fights that you win and some opponents who you beat by standing off and letting them tire themselves out and things, and others that you have to crowd and you get in their face and you wind them up. And so he sees it as this, it's part of a deliberate approach to things, and he understands it because of partly his journalistic training, because his background is as a journalist, but also as a boxer and as a bit of ring craft in terms of how you work out an opponent.
Yeah, he's really good at that.
Great. Good. You think so?
Not just winding people up in general, isn't he? He's good at.
Yeah.
There's definitely more scope for him in another book, though. Are you writing another one with him in, or would it become a series?
I would certainly hope so. That's how I feel about it. I feel that the key that I turn in his back, where I send him off, I feel as though there's an almost infinite number of situations into which I could pitch him. That I would have a great time doing it. One of the inspirations behind the way I approach this book, because the double proof, I mean, I should say, the nature of the story is that the double proof of the title is a rare whiskey. It's a 29-year-old whiskey, which was bottled at 29 years, was considered, this is in the mid-60s in 1964, considered the best whiskey Scotland's ever produced. And then it went missing, and it hasn't appeared. It's been missing for 50 years and has become the kind of the Bigfoot of Scotch. And so its reappearance has triggered a court case between the DLs, which is the DL label, who once owned the whiskey and who believe they should have ownership of this. The guy who's found it, who's a salvage expert, who believes he has proof that it's moved on and actually he can rightfully claim it. And the son of the family then is kidnapped and goes missing, and they start receiving ransom demands just before the court case that's going to settle this. So there is all this, and that's the sort of the chaos into which Gould appears. And so there's this old money whiskey family, and there's a bit of whiskey in the book, but it's not a whiskey book, and that was really important as well, because I like whiskey, but you shouldn't have to like whiskey or know anything about this to enjoy it, you know. So part of it is that Gould, he doesn't like whiskey, and the Scotch whiskey industry, which has a fair conceit of itself and is all lots of marketing fluff. And, you know, as Gould says in the book, it's all shite about the spirit of the Highlands and Braveheart, you know. That, I think, it's sort of ripe for parody, because every distillery has some unique special thing about it and blah, blah, blah. And you can quite easily kind of puncture that stuff. And that was important in terms of making it clear that this is not a kind of whiskey fan fiction, you know, that it's just a way into telling the story and to understanding where the money comes from and things. And one of the inspirations behind that was the Harlan Coben books, the Myron Bolitar stories. And I think the way that he can go into, I mean, it's like a golf tournament. I think it's Backspin, the one where he goes into what is effectively the US Open golf tournament. And there's a disappearance and a murder that happens there. And so it's, you know, it's about golf, but it's not really about golf. It's just that's the milieu in which things are happening, or it's a tennis tournament or whatever it's going to be. And he gets to dip his toe into these environments. And it was really intended to be just the dip of a toe here, that it's not a whiskey book. It doesn't need to be a whiskey book, and you don't need to know anything about it or like whiskey to get anything from it. And Gould's dislike of all that is it makes him a proxy for anyone who isn't interested in it at all. So that was something that was really important. I do like the cover, I have to say, where they've got the sort of whiskey bottle and the spill. I think is really good fun. There was a bit of an echo, I think, when you were talking about previous winners at Bloody Scotland, of the kind of Callum McSorley, you know, the squeaky clean cover. I think there was a bit of an echo with that, the kind of swipe in the suds on the glass that they were going for there, because I think it's got a kind of, you know, it's a similar enough energy.
Yeah. I get what you're saying about the whiskey as well, because Robbie really doesn't like it, does he? Sort of goes through trying it and thinking it's. Robbie shares my feelings about whiskey, I think.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think, and there'll be lots of people's feelings about whiskey, that's how it should be. You know, as I say, it's those kind of things. I think I would like to do future books like that, where it's a toe dip into these other contexts. And I would see him also being a missing persons guy. I think this is his reputation, and this is what he's been dragged into because of the cold case that he was involved in, which is where his psychic reputation came from. That a wee girl had gone missing. It was in the papers, and he went to the police with a theory that he had put together from reading everything, that turned out to be so accurate that they found her too late, but they got the guy that did it. And that earned him this reputation as a psychic crime buster, which is why Imelda has come to him. And he doesn't see it that way. That's not how he believes. He doesn't believe it was any kind of psychic vision at all, but he needs money, so he takes the case. And so that's something that I think I can explore in future. But I enjoyed the pace and the urgency of it. And so Patsy saying that we might get more Robbie, I hope so, very much. I certainly have lots I would like to do with him. I think my feeling is he's a character who really works. I would love to work with him again, if that's the correct phrase to use for that. I really enjoy spending time in his head and peering over his shoulder. And I certainly feel that there's a kind of endless opportunity to put him into lots of different contexts and have him wind up many more people in the future, you know, which I would love to do.
Would he survive more books though? Because he has quite a tough time, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he would end up sort of radiantly scarred by the end of them all. Yeah. As I say, I think if you filmed it exactly as it appears on the page, he almost couldn't possibly survive it, which I think is part of the fun of the book. That's the printed word, you know, that you can have a little bit of that sort of, you know, extra exaggeration. Whether he would survive them, I'm not sure. Certainly any future book, I think, would see him taking, you know, plenty more punishment, which I would gleefully inflict on him because it was great fun to do. So, yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty more people who would like to punch him.
No, an endless amount. Almost anyone who meets him, actually. So, yeah, definitely.
But he still gets the job done, which is great. He's I think that's why people will come to love him.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I'd said I definitely feel that the arc of the character and the breaking down of his reluctance, and what we can clearly see is actually quite a deep emotional commitment to this. I think we get a little bit of his emotional scarring and his kind of belligerent misanthropy, because when we find him, all this stuff that's happened with the cold case and, you know, being dragged through the red tops as this psychic crime buster, and then accused of the crime, and he ends up, you know, getting bags of dog shit through his door and things. Like, he has a pretty rough time of it, and his marriage falls apart. He stops boxing, he loses his career, things go badly, you know. And when we find him at the start of the book, it's 11 years later. So over the course of the book, having had this introduction to him in the first chapter, where he seems fairly awful, as I say, drinking these 2 cups of tea in front of this poor woman, we come to understand him over the course of the book, and we see where these things have come from, and you get to witness the depth of his emotional commitment to these things and the ways in which he is literally haunted by the things that he's been involved in, and that he gets the job done. And part of that determination and the doggedness of it is the physical punishment that he takes, but keeps going. And that's that thing, that the physical punishment, but his tenacity is a physical manifestation of an emotional commitment that is what will endear us to him. And that's why the slightly slapstick violence and the extensive scarring is important, and why it's part of it. It's fun aesthetically. It can be really funny, but it also tells us something about him. That's why it's important, and why he hopefully really endears himself to us. And that's Patsy saying there again about the exploding sponge. I was really pleased with that. The kind of 3-day structure where we move through day 1, day 2, and day 3 with Robbie was something that I really enjoyed. I'd said I wanted it to be really fast and for there to be a sense of things happening really quickly. That was definitely part of it. And that moment with the exploding sponge, and that explosion, the end of that chapter that was a real high point for me when I was writing, because that was a point where I really felt I was in control of the pace of the story and of the structure of it, and what had happened at this point and what was going to happen next. So yeah, I'm pleased that you enjoyed that, because that was something that I really leaned into. I really enjoyed doing that, and I felt that it had really worked, and that it was doing what I wanted it to do.
Right, you've got 3 minutes left, so give us a couple of your recent reading recommendations. So a couple of things you've read recently and really enjoyed.
Well, now, as I say, because I'm writing at the moment, I'm mostly reading non-fiction. So a couple of things. I mean, I would recommend Susie's Crow Moon from the Bloody Scotland shortlist, because I read it on holiday. I really enjoyed it. I'm recommending that one not as the sort of my pick of the shortlist, but because it's the only one of them that I've read so far, to make that clear, not to snub the others. As I say, I've got Doug Sinclair's now. I got it yesterday. I am going to be reading that as well, and very much looking forward to that, and Alan and Daniels as well. I really enjoyed a couple of non-fiction books on holiday, one of which is Ed Zwick's book, Hits, Flops, and Other Illusions, My 40-something Years in Hollywood. And I also really enjoyed a book, I can't remember the writer's name, but it's called The Wrestling. And it's an oral history by Simon Garfield. That's who it was, excuse me, The Wrestling. And it's about the wrestling of yesteryear, Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and Kendo Nagasaki and all that, the British wrestling from back in the day. And it's all these guys, once they've retired, looking back on it and talking about it. And this is kind of light, tentative research that I've been doing, because a sort of backyard wrestling and a Hollywood setting is something that I have thought about for Robbie Gould in future. And so reading these kind of things is something that I do as a sort of, as I say, it's non-fiction, so I don't feel the voice is kind of interrupting what I'm trying to do with my own writing. But it just adds a little bit of grist to the mill in terms of thinking about these things. And the other book that I've read recently that I really enjoyed was Sebastian Barry's Old God's Time. And I think he's a bit of a master, Sebastian Barry. I read that and was a bit spellbound by it. The way that he writes is the voice and his style is something really to aim for and to be inspired by. I had read Days Without End a few years ago and felt almost kind of skinless at the end of it. I thought it was just amazing. So I really enjoyed that. So Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry, Susie's book Crow Moon from the Bloody Scotland shortlist, Hits, Flops, and Other Illusions by Ed Zwick, and Simon Garfield's The Wrestling, which I really, really enjoyed.
And then give us a little sort of advert of what people are going to go away and buy.
With Double Proof, you mean this one? Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this is Double Proof. This is my grown-up fiction crime debut, building on the stuff that I've done for children and young adults previously. It is, I hope, exactly what I kind of set out to achieve, which was that it's fast, funny, and sticks the landing. I was given a really nice endorsement on the front cover by Chris Brookmeyer, which was a bit of a career moment for me. You know, I'd said before how much I had enjoyed reading his stuff, and particularly A Big Boy Did It and Ran Away was something that I read and reread. Boiling a Frog, you know, these ones, he was doing what I wanted to do so much. And so for him to have read my book and, you know, given it a stamp of approval, he'd read it really quickly and emailed me to say, loved it, great, you know, was, you know, a bit of a life moment. And so if you like Chris Brookmeyer's work, this is very much in that sort of idiom. It's you know, smart mouth Glaswegians with comedy, violence, and hopefully a really satisfying ending.
It was. And then all that's left to say is thanks for joining us.
Well, listen, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great fun, and looking forward to seeing anyone who's at Bloody Scotland in a few weeks. Can't wait to be involved with that.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you very much. Cheers now. Thank you.